migration. We still host our NUPS network with very dedicated scholars, and we have a circle of friends, so all people who help us to do the webinars, who are involved in our activities, they are part of our NUPS Friends network, which is much fun also, so I invite you just to come up to join us here. So our first webinar is because we thought that we see Germany and Canada as well as the two leading countries worldwide who have proactive migration policies, who focus also on fair migration and which come up with innovative programs also. So, and we thought it's a good idea to learn from each other. It is worth to continue our webinar series we had already with a focus on the German-Canadian comparison. And so what is the topic we have today? Our first one, and that has a long title, and we called it The Governance of Welcome, Comparing Narratives and Practices of Newcomer Labor Market Integration in Canada and Germany. And I'm very honored that we have fabulous speakers who could win. So the topic is a bit cloudy. That's what we know. All of us, we know that. So we have invited speakers from Canada and Germany who work since long on the topics, and we asked them to speak in 8 minutes each. We asked them to speak about how to measure welcome cultures, how to enhance welcome cultures, what are the tools. So it's very contested if we can speak of a real welcome culture, how to measure, what to do. And third point, how to fight conflict, as we see in both countries that we have a strong right-wing and populist movement. So the 3 questions will have been suggested to all of the speakers. Each one has 8 minutes, and we leave the recording of our webinar as long as we hear the speakers. Afterwards, we have time for discussion in the chat and wherever you want. Also via the mic, we leave that open to you. And I have the pleasure to present now the 2 German speakers, the 1 hybrid speakers, which is Giacomo Solanas, because he is comparing, he's having a very international work perspective. So the speakers from Germany, I'm very happy that Dr. Ulrike Wieland is here. She's a senior expert at the Bertelsmann think tank in Gütersloh. She's part of the program Democracy and Social Cohesion, and she did some reports already on welcome cultures. And she will speak about the results of the last round. She will only speak about it. She won't show the PowerPoint presentation. So I'm very honored to have her here today and to listen to her. We have then Lorenz Wiese. He's head of the Migration and Intercultural Opening Department at the German Federal Workers' Welfare Association, shortly AWO. So one of the big players in the field. And as Ulrike, also Lorenz has worked on Canada already, so I'm pleased to have him here. And he's very critical about this comparative lens. I know that, I've seen his publications. Welcome. I hand over to Luisa now, who's representing the Canadian side, and I wish you a very good webinar.
Yes, thank you very much, Felicitas. Welcome, everyone. We're very excited. And to make the most of the time, I'll jump right into introducing our 2 Canadian-based speakers and our comparative speaker. So Professor Leah Hamilton is Vice Dean Research and Community Relations and Professor of Organizational Behavior at Mount Royal University in Calgary. Leah's research focuses on the resettlement of newcomers and refugees in Canada. She also frequently collaborates with newcomer communities and the settlement sector. We also have Dr. Paul Holy, who is the Research and Evaluation Director at the Association for Canadian Studies and Metropolis Institute. His research focuses on the advancement of the Canadian Index for Measuring Integration and Inclusion and the Nunavut Inuit Sustainable Housing Index, Anti-Racism and Mental Health. And last but not least, Dr. Giacomo Solano, who is assistant professor in migrant inclusion at the Nijmegen School of Management and is affiliated with the Radboud University Network on Migrant Inclusion. He specializes in social and labor market integration of migrants, migrant entrepreneurship, and comparative integration policies. Now, the order will not be exactly like that. We will start with the two presentations on Canada. Giacomo will be the transition to compare the two countries, and then we'll have the German-based speakers. I think we will get started right away. So our first speaker is Paul Holy, who will tell us of the Canadian Index for Measuring Integration and Inclusion. So Paul, feel free to get started. You're muted still.
There we go. Okay, so thank you for joining everybody. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Canadian Index for Measuring Integration and Inclusion today. We don't have much time, so I'm just going to kind of skip over some of this, but really what is the CIMI? It's meant to be a resource or a tool, a centralized data hub for policymakers, researchers, and really mostly settlement service provider organizations. The intent is to build the capacity of these local organizations that are frontline workers that serve the settlement, that serve immigrants and newcomers. And it really, what it does is it evaluates the relative parity that is achieved between immigrants and the Canadian-born population. Also within immigrant groups, we look at more recent versus more established immigrants across a number of dimensions, which I'll show you shortly. It does span across 30 years. That's one of the uniqueness aspects of it. It's not just a single cross-section. We do it every 5 years along with the Canadian Census. And it provides rankings currently for the 10 provinces and 35 cities, census metropolitan areas. However, we are expanding that to the north. And the rankings are really based on the gap between immigrants and the Canadian-born population on any given indicator. So if you think about economic indicators of labor force participation or wages, what's the gap between immigrants and non-immigrants in a given geography, given all the controls, socio-demographic controls taken into account? So the smaller the gap, the better the geography is doing. To give you an idea of our indicators we use and our dimensions, we have 4 dimensions: the economic, the social, civic, and health related dimensions. And you can see a number of indicators under each of those. We're also exploring some new indicators such as core housing need. As opposed to unemployment, we're looking at underemployment, so matching skill levels with actual occupations in terms of education. And so we also have social factors, sense of belonging, if you've been a victim of discrimination, your involvement in organizations or your voting patterns under the civic. And then health is really about health access, if you have a medical doctor, also if you have life stress and other factors that you see there. We do have an expert advisory committee which helped us get to all those indicators, because we've sussed out quite a few leading up to that. Just wanted to let you know that we do have a steering committee or an advisory committee that does help vet the processes and the methodology as well. And without getting into too much detail, this is really what the model is. It's a regression model for each indicator that we look at, looking at immigrant status and geography as our key variables. And it's really the intersection between immigrant status and geography that's our key factor that we're using to rank geographies. Just to touch briefly upon this, we recently went from an integration to an inclusion framework, which is really, if you think about inclusion, it's opportunities for all. Regardless of immigrant status, of other background factors. And so what we do to get to that inclusion framework is really the same kind of analysis, but it's asking different questions. It's maybe instead of asking, did somebody get a job? Are they employed? It's what kind of job did they get? Is it sustainable employment? Is it something that can support their family for the long term? And so what we really do is we intersect our data through SGBA plus, sex and gender-based analysis plus, and looking at different identity markers such as gender, visible minority status, broken down by the different groups. We have 13 different ethnic groups that we document in Canada. Official language minorities, and also generation status and emission categories, so first, second, and third gen, and so on. And what that allows us to do is, as opposed to just looking at immigrant versus non-immigrant, you can really start breaking down. You can see here, for instance, the different visible minority groups across generation statuses and looking at income. And you can see for the most part, second generation is doing better than first or third. However, there are exceptions, namely if you look at the Arab population in Canada, third generation or more tends to be doing a lot better in terms of income. And that's the same thing with those for females. We do have a website which has a lot of this data from the past 30 years. It's integrationindex.ca. So I would invite you to check it out if you do get a chance. And just to give you some of the idea of some of the visualizations we're doing with the data. But once we have everything ranked, we'll have mappings of all the provinces. You can also zoom in on provinces. So these are provincial dimensional ranks for the economic dimension for the most recent time period. You can see that Quebec in this case is not doing so well relative to, say, Manitoba, Newfoundland, BC, Saskatchewan are doing all right as well. And to give you that other, once you zoom into a province and you get to the city level, this is the area, this is where we're going to, is looking at neighborhood level. So this is the city of Toronto, what you're seeing here, the different neighborhoods. And this is the gap in low income cutoff between immigrants and non-immigrants. So if you look at Richmond Hill and Markham, those areas, the biggest gap exists. So you might say the largest gap in terms of wealth or in terms of poverty status. And here's a similar map for unemployment rate. We also do, in terms of this, since this is a tool meant really for service providers, we do have an online semi course. It's an e-learning course, which has 10 different lessons, as you can see, and it basically interviews key experts in the area, goes through the tool itself, the website, and how to use it and what you can do with it. And just to kind of sum up what we're talking about this year is some new feasibility studies, some new areas. So not just looking at immigrant status, recent immigrant status, but also looking at these other identifiers such as official language minority communities. So looking at how are English-speaking immigrants in, say, Quebec, which is pretty much a French province, how do they integrate? How are they included in Quebec society? And on the opposite side of this, at the end there, we're looking at French-speaking communities in the rest of Canada, so outside of Quebec. How are they integrating, and what kind of barriers are they having to that process? I also mentioned rural and northern immigration. That's one thing we're looking to do, is expand the CIMI to the territories up north, where I'm actually currently in Nunavut. So there's a good. We have other work that we're doing here, and it just makes sense to extend this project to the north and see how immigration efforts are going here. And one other thing we're also working on is an employer insights and newcomer occupations. So it's working with employers, starting with the province of British Columbia, to find out what are their needs, what are their gaps, and if you think about in terms of skills, and looking at from a geography-based approach where those gaps are and how employers can help fill those gaps with the talent pool of newcomers. And so other things we're trying to do, again, is expand the CIMI, not just to the north, but to the south as well. We have a presentation we're going to be doing next week in New York City, where we're going to be talking with the Census Bureau on a feasibility study of how to create a North American index for measuring integration and inclusion. So that's something else that's in the works for the CIMI. It's probably about all the time I have for now. I want to make sure other speakers have their due time. So there's my contact information, and certainly we'll take any questions at the end of this.
Thank you very much, Paul. Very efficient and an excellent overview. I think we all have questions already for you. So if you could share your presentation, and we'll jump right into Leah's presentation. Leah will tell us about the Welcoming Communities initiative, which includes a framework and also a variety of indicators. So Leah, you can start.
Hey, thank you so much, Louisa and Felicitas, for inviting me and for organizing this. I'm really excited to be here today to talk about some recent work I've been doing on measuring and promoting welcoming communities in Canada. So I just want to say from the beginning that this work is really done with communities in mind. So it's for specific communities who want to address and improve how welcoming they are to immigrants. I do want to acknowledge that this work is done via the Pathways to Prosperity partnership with Victoria Esses as lead, and then with our great collaborators, Awisha Aslam and Priscilla Barros. So I want to begin by just asking, what do we mean when we talk about welcoming communities, particularly in the context of the work I'm going to be speaking about today? So we define a welcoming community as a collective effort to design and sustain a place where immigrants feel they belong and that supports immigrants' economic, social, cultural, and civic political integration. So to do this, a welcoming community has structures, processes, and practices in place that meet the needs and promote the inclusion of immigrants in all aspects of life, and actively works to ensure that these processes and structures are effective. So back in 2010, we wrote a report on characteristics of a welcoming community, and that was commissioned by Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada. That report was widely used and well cited, but now it's, I guess almost 13 years later, and we thought it's time to revamp this and revitalize this. So we decided to develop two practical toolkits. One is focused on measuring welcoming communities. I'll spend most of my time there today. That report has been released. And the second toolkit is about promoting welcoming communities, and that is in the works and should be released in early 2024. So as I mentioned, this toolkit 1 is complete, and it includes the characteristics of a welcoming community and indicators that can be used to measure each characteristic. So I want to move to the specific characteristics. To determine what these were, we reviewed a bunch of recent literature in this area, and we also polled about almost 260 key informants from levels of government and others that were working in the area of settlement and integration. And essentially, we identified 19 key characteristics of welcoming communities, and we tried to cluster them in relative importance based on some consensus among respondents. But of course, there isn't complete consensus ever. But one thing we want to emphasize is that the importance of each characteristic to a given community will vary. And we also want to note that characteristics influence each other. They can be mutually reinforcing, so they may increase or decrease the impact of one another. And we also note that when communities consider these characteristics, they must take into account the needs of multi-barriered immigrants, so racialized women, youth, seniors, 2S LGBTQIA+ immigrants, refugees, and immigrants with disabilities. So as I said, we did identify 19 characteristics, and we tried to sort of rank them or cluster them in terms of their importance. So cluster A, there was a lot of consensus among the key informants we talked to that these are the top 5 characteristics of a welcoming community in Canada. So, and these are not in any particular order within the cluster, just these are the top 5. So access to affordable, adequate, and suitable housing, employment and entrepreneurship opportunities, which will be my focus today, access to suitable healthcare, including mental health care, positive attitudes toward immigrants of all racial, cultural, and religious backgrounds, and access to immigrant serving agencies that meet immigrants' needs. I don't think I have time to go through the next clusters in a lot of detail, but essentially we have cluster B, which are also quite important, but a bit less consensus. And again, the order within this cluster is quite tenuous, but this includes things like transportation, education, commitment to anti-racism and anti-oppression, and so on. And then we have cluster C. Again, these are within the top 19 characteristics of a welcoming community, but considered to be slightly less important, generally speaking. So I'm going to move now to talk a little bit about indicators. So for each of the 19 characteristics I mentioned, we provide comprehensive lists of indicators. So usually for each characteristic, we have a couple dozen indicators, and these are qualitative and quantitative measures that can be used to assess the level of each characteristic in a community. So for example, for employment, and you'll see the big list in a minute, one indicator is rate of employment of working age immigrants. But what we suggest is that it's important for communities to measure multiple indicators for each characteristic. Some of these can be measured more objectively with existing data. Others are based on perceptions or immigrants' lived experience, and both are very important. So I want to give you an example and show you the indicators for employment and entrepreneurship opportunities. So again, the idea would be that a community would identify this as one of the characteristics that they're really interested in measuring. And then they would take a look at this huge list of indicators and they would say, in this moment of time, the indicators that we're most interested in, for example, might be rate of employment of working age immigrants. Perhaps they're interested in some of the things going on within organizations. So rate of employee turnover. They might be interested in rate of discrimination and exploitation perpetrated by employers in hiring and at work. Or perhaps they're interested in more entrepreneurial indicators like rate of self-employment and rate of success among entrepreneurs in the short and long term. So again, we have a whole other slide of additional employment and entrepreneurship indicators. And you'll see at the bottom some of those more subjective or lived experience indicators, like immigrants' levels of satisfaction with the availability and quality of local French and English-speaking labor market opportunities, and even where they're able to get information about things like workers' rights. So I hope that gives you a sense of the types of indicators. So the other thing that the toolkit helps communities do is to think about meaningful comparisons. When we talk about measuring, we think about, well, who are we comparing this group to? So depending on a community's needs and interests at a given point in time, they might decide that, for this indicator, the key comparator group is non-immigrants within the same community. Or a community might say, we're actually interested in seeing how immigrants now are doing compared to previous cohorts, or compared to other communities or provincial or territorial or national averages. Communities might also be interested in measuring indicators both before and after a new initiative around welcoming communities is implemented. And then, of course, coming back to my earlier comment about multi-barrier groups, it's also important to conduct comparisons among different groups of immigrants, including multi-barrier groups. So as I mentioned, the second toolkit is in progress. This will focus on promoting welcoming communities and include descriptions of Canadian and international promising practices for each characteristic, including key structures and processes that make them effective. So for each practice, it would include things like the name of the organization, links to the practice, overviews and goals, key features, outcomes, and so on. So I'm just going to give you one example because I know I don't have a ton of time today. But the example that I wanted to talk about today is called the Virtual Remote Employment and Career Help Virtual Reach. And this training and delivery of this program are run through Douglas College. But the objective here is to design and deliver a virtual employment and skills training program that's aligned with the needs of newcomers in remote regions of British Columbia. So this program is interesting. It's fully remote. It's barrier-free. So participants are even mailed laptops. The content, delivery, and curriculum are all considered to be barrier-free. They're delivered through this really interesting combination of synchronous and asynchronous learning, and the content's really tailored to local labor markets in remote British Columbia. The other interesting thing about this program is it's fully aligned with Skills for Success, which is Canada's new skills framework. So the reason I wanted to highlight this as a promising practice today is because of the outcomes that this program has demonstrated in a very rigorous way. So Social Research and Demonstration Corporation conducted an arm's length evaluation of this program with 100 newcomers, and they used an interrupted time series design with mixed methods. So they had baseline, they had 2 post-program follow-ups, they had a waitlisted control group, and they were able to showcase that this promising practice led to significantly higher job search clarity and self-efficacy, a variety of skills on collaboration, adaptability, digital skills, higher social networks and sense of belonging, and greater placement in full-time jobs. So this is an example of the type of promising practice that will be highlighted. Whoops. So I will stop there. I think I'm out of time. I welcome your questions and comments later. If you want to see the toolkits, you can scan this QR code or Google P2P Welcoming Communities. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Leah. I was just about to ask you to conclude, so good timing. And our third speaker is Giacomo Solano, who will give us some comparisons between Canada and Germany.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. So I'm going to introduce a little bit about integration policies in a comparative perspective. Integration policies as a way of kind of governing the welcoming of migrants. And I will also provide the example of the Migrant Integration Policy Index as a way to measure, let's say, welcome. And also I will touch base on how to fight conflict in a way by looking at the possible effect of integration policies. In general, let's say that integration policies can be defined as all the criteria, policies, laws that stipulate what is expected from the migrants, also the condition to be a part of the society, and migrants' entitlements and rights. So the MIPEX is the short form, the Migrant Integration Policy Index, is a project that run or have been running since the early 2000s, actually, with 5 editions, and the last edition was in 2020, analyzing policies from 2014 and 2019. It's what it's normally called a kind of set of indicators. So we have a standardized questionnaire with indicators that try to kind of transform, let's say, laws and policies, so something that is qualitative in something that is more quantitative with a score by using the indicators. One example is this one on access to employment in the private sector, for example, and we score each country. So country expert scores each indicator for each country based on laws and policies, and then these indicators are then summed up in a way to create and combine to create an index. The theoretical starting points of the MIPEX, well, we have kind of 2 theoretical starting points. The first one is the principle of equality of opportunities. So migrants should have, in a way, the same opportunities and access to the same opportunity as non-migrants or natives. And then the second principle, the second point, is the principle of migrant vulnerability. So migrants, as statistics and figures show, they are in a more vulnerable position compared to natives most of the time. So they kind of need additional support. That's why the MIPEX look at, through these indicators, to the combination of access to rights, but also to access to mainstream and or targeted support. The indicators have been designed looking at a quality standard based on international kind of references like the UN, ILO, and international convention, or even EU directives. Concretely, let's say we focus on 3 main target groups of migrants. So the international and general international migrants, so non-citizens, and we look at temporary migrant workers, family united migrants, and permanent residents to understand also the differences that we can see based on the legal characteristic and the legal status. We, as I said, we started in the 2000s, and the last edition covered from 2014 to 2019, and we covered 56 countries, all continents actually. You can see from the pictures here. So we have all the North American countries, some Latin American countries like Brazil, Argentina. We have 1 country in Africa, which is South Africa, the entire EU, additional European countries, Norway, for example, Switzerland, and we have also Australia and New Zealand, and in Asia, we have many countries like Japan, South Korea, India, Indonesia as well. And we cover 8 main policy areas. labor, for example, labor market, education, access to nationality, access to permanent residence, health, and anti-discrimination. Very important, I already touched upon that, but I think it's important to stress again. So we have these questionnaires that are standardized, and we rely on experts, 1, 2, or even 3 for each country. And the experts fill in the questionnaire based on laws and policies in the country. So the structure is kind of the following. So we have the indicators, so the 56 indicators, and each indicator score ranges from 0, the least inclusive, to 100, the most inclusive policies. Then we do an average based on the policy area to understand the level of integration policy in each area. And then we do a further aggregation, so by calculating the average of all the area scores to have a final global overall score for each country. So based on this scoring system, we come up with, as I said, with a score for each country, and we produce a set of comparative analysis. Here you can see a map, and you can always grasp, for example, the message that on average, policies in Asia, for example, are less inclusive than policies in Northern America. I'm going quickly because I don't have much time, but we can compare countries, but we can compare also policy areas globally. So, for example, you can see here that on average, globally policies on anti-discrimination for migrants are more advanced, more inclusive than, for example, policies on education and political participation of migrants. And then we can also compare countries and provide a nuanced analysis of each country based on the different policy area. Here, for example, you can see that the MIPEX score in general for Canada is higher than the ones for Germany. But you can also see that, for example, on labor market, policies in Germany are rather more inclusive than the ones in Canada. So I'm not going into detail, but just I wanted just to show the possible comparison that you can make with the MIPEX. We wanted also to go a little bit beyond these policy areas, and also see if there were like emerging areas, emerging kind of dimensions from the data. And so what I did is to do some statistical analysis, so principal component analysis in particular, and we identified 3 main dimensions of integration policies. The first one is what we call basic rights. So so whether or not migrants can enjoy similar or comparable rights as national. And here we talk about rights to work, training, access to healthcare, and non-discrimination policies. Then the second one is what we call equal opportunities. Here is more about the support that they receive to enjoy equal opportunities. So here it can be, for example, targeted support in education, support to concretely access the healthcare system. So in the first dimension, it's so the first dimension, for example, refers more at whether or not migrants have access to the healthcare system, while the second one on equal opportunities is actually whether or not they are supported to access the healthcare system. And another example is political participation. The third one is what we call secure future, and it refers to the long-term settlement and the feeling of having a future, the feeling or secure in the country. And here we look, for example, and when I say that the indicators that fall under this dimension refers to family reunification, permanent residence, or access to nationality. So based on this analysis, I was able also to create a score for each country on these 3 dimensions, and also to do a global average. And you can see that let's say that countries tend to provide more inclusive policies on basic rights and less to secure future, and even less on equal opportunities. After that, I wanted to look at the approaches towards migrant integration based on these three dimensions. So I used this course from these three dimensions, and through cluster analysis, I was able to identify 5 different approaches towards migrant integration. The first one is what we call a top comprehensive approach. So countries, they provide equal, or they are very close to provide equal rights, so basic rights, equal opportunities, and also a long-term security, a long-term future to migrants.
I'm sorry, you will need to conclude within the next minute or so, please.
Okay, so I will just finish this 5. So these are the 5 approaches based on whether or not they provide more or less inclusive policies to migrants. What I wanted maybe just to say is that so Canada falls under the first category, the comprehensive top 10 category, in which, as I said, country provide almost equal access to rights, opportunities, and long-term settlement, while Germany falls under what we call temporary integration, meaning you can see that the country provides rather inclusive policies when it comes to rights, to support, to enjoy equal opportunities, but it still lacks somehow when it comes to providing or make it easier for migrants to stay in the country longer. Maybe if I have just time, I wanted just to say how to fight.
We're running out of time.
Yeah. Okay. So I will come. Yeah. Okay. So thank you so much. And yeah, sorry if I was too long.
Thank you. No worries. I know it's hard to stick with time when you have so many interesting things. So our next speaker is Ulrike, who will tell us about the Bertelsmann survey on perceptions and attitudes towards migration and integration.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's great to be here. Yes, I would like to share some results from our survey, which is about welcome culture in Germany. Basically, it's about perceptions and attitudes among the German population with regard to questions concerning welcome culture and migration and integration in Germany. We conduct this study. We conduct this survey every 2 years, and I can show you now the results from our published study in 2021, because this session is recorded and circulated, and I do have new results from October 2023, but as we have not published them yet, I can just comment on the 2021 results, but let you know how things have changed since 2021. So let's start with the estimated consequences of migration. So how do respondents feel about the consequences of migrations? What expectations do they have? You can see on the left-hand side, the bluish and green lines, they indicate expected positive consequences of migrations, consequences that are beneficial to society. And you can see that in our survey from 2017, there was a drop in positive expectations, and that was some time after the enthusiasm about welcoming refugees in 2015, coming mostly from Syria. So there was really a big enthusiasm about welcoming refugees. But then after some time, of course, there were also challenges and some problems and some exhaustion. And so we saw that drop in 2017. But since then, positive expectations had increased again steadily until 2021. But now in 2023, we see a bit of a similar development, like in 2017. We conducted the survey this year at the end of October, which means that we saw several months of critical debate around migration, asylum seekers, so very critical debate about these topics in politics and in the media. And then, of course, the terrible attack of Hamas on Israel happened at the beginning of October. And in this surroundings, we also had many demonstrations, pro-Palestinian demonstrations, also in German cities, and some of them were perceived very problematic because some of them even promoted this Hamas attack. And so there was a really special situation in October when we conducted this new survey, and it was not surprising then that attitudes had changed. So there was a drop in the positive expectations, but not too extremely, I'd say. So, but still, you would really recognize them, and rise or increase in the problematic expectations, especially in terms of housing. So people worrying about how migration would affect the housing situation in metropolitan areas in Germany. So this has been an issue which has increased a lot, which I think might be a bit of a similarity to Canada. I think in recent times also housing was an issue in Canada as well. So this is a bit of a general picture. Then here you can see some perceptions of the respondents, what they think, how are migrants welcomed? And we differentiate migrants here, migrant workers, so people who come for a job or for studying to Germany, or people who come for humanitarian reasons, which means refugees. So this is one differentiation. And the other differentiation is between if migrants are welcomed by municipalities, so basically by the state on the municipal level. And the other question, are they welcomed by the local population? So, and these are the perceptions of the respondents, and they perceive quite, so majority actually thinks that migrants are welcomed both by the state and by the local population. But you can also see that the lowest number is with the refugees being welcomed by local population, and this is also the number which has decreased a little bit, but not too much now in 2023. So this is kind of stable since 2021, but what has really changed is people's attitudes and preferences regarding new refugees. So to say like welcoming even more migrants, and here especially refugees, because it's always different with skilled work migration. So there's really a difference, but these are the preferences regarding refugees. And here I can tell you that the statement that Germany can't take in more refugees because it has reached its capacity limits. So this perception has really increased now in October this year. And the opposed statement that Germany can and should take in more refugees because it is a humanitarian necessity has decreased. And also you can see that this a bit hostile statement of that Germany should not put any effort into integrating refugees because they are temporary guests. This is also increased several points. So there is changed perceptions and attitudes towards refugees in Germany in October 2023. But the attitude that the German state should make sure that refugees can take up work quickly is something that a big majority agrees on. So there's consent on this, and this also it has not changed. So this is a stable result. So this is some insights in our survey. But to complete the picture, I would like to show you from some other surveys from other institutes some perceptions of skilled migrant workers. So people. So some perceptions of migrants themselves who have come to Germany to work here. And this is an OECD study from published this year, a survey among foreign skilled workers. Most of them are still outside Germany, but they also have some results from respondents who have already made it to Germany and reside here. And the statement that Germany is a country that is welcoming to immigrants is shared by quite many of them. So, but you of course have to take into account that many of them say, okay, they somewhat agree. So it's not like a completely full agreement, but still it's not such a bad result. But if you ask, or the statement to say it is easy to integrate in Germany, it's not so overwhelming, I guess. So still, it's still 40% to say, okay, I somewhat agree, and 13 more and who strongly agree. But this is obviously a mixed result, I guess. And then lastly, I'd like to show you a survey. It's a non-representative survey, but still interesting, published this year. A survey among Filipinian nursing specialists who work in Germany. And from this group of respondents, about half of them, 54%, agree that to the statement, I feel welcome here. So, and still also a qualified agreement. So mostly agree, 38%. So this is a mixed picture, and the same is true for the other statement. I would recommend this job to family and friends in my home country. It's also a mixed picture, but so it's maybe not overwhelmingly welcoming, but or the feeling is not one of that Germany is very, very welcoming. But compared to a similar survey the year before, results have improved. So yeah, so this is a bit of a mixed picture, and my conclusion is what I already said: mixed picture at a critical point in time. So the German population is still ambivalent towards migration. This is always I'd say the result. The people see have positive expectations, but also some worries and some negative expectations. But recently, the more critical assessments of what we can expect from migration have increased in the German population. And among the foreign skilled workers, we can also see there are mixed feelings about how they are welcomed and supported in Germany. And so I think Germany is at a critical point right now. And the question is, will it preserve and improve its welcome culture, which has really established more since 2015. There have been built structures of welcome on the municipal level and on the whole state level in Germany. But and we also saw this renewed in the Ukraine crisis and the over 1 million refugees who came to Germany. So that there is actually a welcome culture that has been built up in the last decade. But the question is, will it prevail, or will maybe our country eventually tune in with its European environment of countries pursuing an increasingly restrictive politics towards migration, especially refugee migration? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ulrike, for your overview and the insights in the next wave or the next wave of your study. Much appreciated. We have another speaker here, Lawrence Wiese. Please just take the floor. I'm looking forward to your presentation, and if it's such skeptical, as we heard from Ulrike now. Please.
Yeah, thanks. Can you see the slides?
Yeah, all good.
Perfect. Thanks for the invitation, Felicitas. Good to see you all. Yeah, I'm here to provide some kind of a reality check. I agree most of all with what Ulrike Wieland just said. I would argue actually that overall Germany has built up an quite unique infrastructure that is unique internationally, especially after 2015 when it comes to social participation, labor market participation of people from different countries, especially also people with qualification that they brought with them and that they didn't formalize before they came to Germany. So for them, it's possible now in Germany to determine what professional experience they have brought, even if they don't, if they can't show any certificates for it. So I would say this is some sign for political pragmatism in Germany that has grown over time. Also some indicator for some kind of a meritocracy, if you want. So the policies in place here are, just to name a few, integration courses, but also migration counseling for different target groups. And so I'm here for the ABO, which is one of the biggest providers of these courses, and also especially the migration counseling for adults in Germany. So this is some of the structures that we have in place and that we offer to newcomers, be they either refugees or workers coming to Germany. So I think the need that all of this should be expanded has grown in the last few years, but at the moment we are at a critical point in time, and I want to highlight this today because at the moment, as Ulrike mentioned, the debate on migration is primarily all about how the numbers of arrivals can be reduced. I don't know if like the majority of German voters has this clear distinction in mind between refugees and the needed workers. It's kind of a mixed picture, I would argue. And so the demands of many politicians are getting more and more populist over the past weeks and months, and less rational also. Our approach as a welfare organization in Germany, on the other hand, is to, of course, focus on the more positive aspects, as it was mentioned, the need for skilled workers. So we're trying to put a different spin on it and to do advocacy work for policies to be increased and improved. So yeah, to just mention that for completeness, of course, it is not unlikely at all that there will be more and more gaps in the labor market in the medium term in Germany. So we will need more and more immigration to Germany to just have a stability and maybe even growth, which even the more conservative and liberal parties would certainly agree to. So if we don't have that, more and more existential services will probably not be available sufficiently overall in Germany. And so this gap will continue to widen. So I think there's a growing need for sure to invest in these policies. However, a lot is uncertain, even more since this year. As I said, the majority of the discussion is rather one-sidedly anti-migration. So the sheer necessity of countering the labor shortage through immigration is maybe not seen by a great deal of voters. So especially if you have in mind the proportion of right-wing voters in some German states, especially in the East, it's a worrying picture for the next year also to come. So yeah, what do we actually find at the moment? So demographic change, as I said, but also as I call it, a ping pong game of responsibility between the different authorities in Germany. So the federal authorities, the state authorities, and the local authorities kind of play this game of who should be in charge and who should pay for all of this to happen. So should it be something that the cities and the localities are responsible for? Is it something that the federal government should pay for all over Germany? So what the federal government does is to argue there are some services in place in some of the German states already, so why should we offer something for the whole of Germany at the federal level? But this does not apply for all of the states. So if they kind of drop out, they leave some gaps in many states. That's a problem for sure in the argumentation at the moment. What is even more problematic is what I call the quiet death, the silent death of the providers of welcome service at the moment, because we have a difficult situation that is at the same time cuts in the budget for these existential services and at the same time increasing costs. So we have a high inflation, well, maybe not high compared internationally, but still for German relations, it's not that low. The rents are increasing, the wages are increasing. All of that has to be paid by the providers of these welcoming services. But the money, the share of the money that we can get back from the state is not increasing dynamically as it should be over the same time. So the providers, of course, need adequate funding to enable us to adapt to cost increases, wage rises, and so on, but also to improve the counseling ratio, to sustainably strengthen cross-case networking, to promote digitalization in counseling work, and to guarantee interpreting services, group offers, and so on and so forth. So this is just to give you some examples of the work that is being done in German migration counseling centers. However, we were quite shocked this summer. The draft federal budget for the next year envisaged a cut of up to 30%, a cut, not an increase of this money that is available for the whole of Germany for counseling, for example, adult immigrants. And these cuts would have a devastating impact on the established landscape of counseling for sure. So it's not only detrimental to the target groups of the programs and the employees on the ground, but it also threatens, as we argue, social cohesion in Germany, because these people would basically not find any offer that is tailored to them in many places anymore if these centers have to close and not offer their services anymore. So it's an urgent need. This is what we try to tell policymakers, to save these structures and to actually invest in them. If you don't know what migration counseling is, I might just, if I still have a few minutes, go into detail a little bit. So it's a central cross-thematic and in some federal states, the only local counseling service for needs-based support for newcomers. I think in Canada, you have these settlement services. It's quite similar, where you also have like a individually tailored support, basically, where you can find help for whatever question you might have. So it's been networking closely with other services in the social area, and it has been a part of the federal government's integration services since actually 2005. And it has been growing ever since until this year. Now it's the first time we actually have cuts, even though migration is at a constantly high level. So this dismantling of our advice centers makes it, of course, much more difficult for new immigrants in Germany to participate, not only in the labor market, but also in education and society. And so it fails to achieve the paradigm shift of immigration policy in Germany as it has been announced in the coalition agreement of the current government. So particularly in what I call migration critical environments or structurally weak and rural regions, these counseling centers are particularly important factors for local social integration, because there's nobody else that has any knowledge, any expertise on migration issues and on the issues that migrants face when they first come to Germany. So to sum up, the field of work has become increasingly important and urgent over the years, and the need for advice is constantly increasing. But at the same time, especially small providers are no longer able to cope with the rising costs. And so to our great regret, as one of the biggest providers in Germany of these services, is that many are now being forced to discontinue this work. And at the end of the year, we will see who is going on to have their counselors still in place from January on. So I think it would be more than important at the present time to not cut down this, as I have made clear, I think, in my talk. And so, we just have to bear in mind that the contributions that these providers have to make themselves in these funding programs are continually increasing, and it's not longer affordable by many. So that's the short overview, a reality check of what situation we're in now. You can also check out our website. It's in English. And you will find more information about this program there. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your presentation, Lawrence. It painted a dark picture, I would say. And also Rike's presentation showed us that we have quite some problems ahead, I think. But what I think is also true that we have in Canada, for example, a privatized settlement service for a large part of it, as far as I understood. But I would like to give room to the questions in the chat, or if you have questions directly, please feel free to ask them to the speakers. Let me see what we have in the chat.